Alright, so why don't we give you a couple seconds to try and answer the problem. And as you can see, it says pause video and attempt problem. When you're done attempting the problem and you're ready to move on, why don't you go ahead and replay the video, and then we will begin. Alright, great. So, the question has inequalities up here, and the inequality is r times t is less than 0, which is less than negative r. And if we break these into two different things, we can understand them better, and that'll help us answer this problem. First is that r times t is less than 0. Okay, now this tells you a little bit about what's happening. And what this is going to tell you is that either r or t must be negative, and the other one must be positive. Right? One of them has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. And the reason why is because a positive multiplied by a positive is always going to be another positive. Right? So like 7 times 7 is equal to 49. You know, things like that. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. That was a 2. Doesn't matter. That's the point, right? So a positive times positive equals a positive. A positive times a negative always equals a negative. So if you've got a positive, you multiply it by a negative, you're always going to get a negative. Right, so that would be 7 times negative 7, right? 7 times negative 7 is equal to negative 49. Alright, now if you have two negatives, say it's negative 7 times negative 7, that equals a positive 49. So a negative multiplied by a negative is going to equal another positive. Right, so these are kind of the three general rules, and we know that whatever these two are multiplied by each other, they're going to be less than 0. Less than 0 means negative, which means one of these is going to be negative, the other is going to be positive, because that's the situation in which you get a negative number. Now, that's what we know here, but we also know this second part. So that was this first inequality. Now let's look at this second one right here. We also know that 0 is less than negative r, or in other words, negative r is greater than 0. Alright, so negative r is positive. Alright, so now with an inequality like this, you can divide by negatives in order to get a variable by itself. So you can divide this entire thing by negative 1. And then you divide 0 by negative 1. And what you end up getting is that you end up getting 0 is greater than r. Right, so this is, and what happens, sorry, just to make sure that this makes sense, when you multiply by a negative number, you always have to switch an inequality. Right? So if you multiply by this negative number, if you multiply or you divide by negative 1, multiply or divide, you have to switch this inequality like this. So when you divide by negative 1 here, you have 0 is less than negative r, you switch the inequality, it becomes 0 is greater than r. Okay, that makes sense. Or you can just think of it intuitively. Negative r has to be greater than 0, so negative r is positive. And if negative r is positive, then r has got to be negative. Okay? That is the situation. So r is negative. R is less than 0. So now that we know that, now that we have found out that r is less than 0, and we also know that you need a positive and a negative to get a negative number, now we're in business, because we know that r has to be negative, and we know that r times t has to also be less than 0, or negative. Then we know that a negative multiplied by something has to be less than 0, which means this has to be positive. Right? So a negative multiplied by a positive equals a negative multiplied by a negative equals a positive. So we need this to be a positive in order for the combination of these two things multiplied together to be negative. That means that t is greater than 0 because t is positive. Alright, great. So we know that t is positive, and that's actually all we need because quantity A is t and quantity B is 0. So when it comes to which one is greater, t is definitely greater than b, like this, because t is greater than 0. So the answer is A. Circle.